I would love to introduce our guest here to say that 2 years ago when we met in this room, I was inspired by her story, a story that encapsulates hospitality, sustainable tourism, community-based tourism, leadership, and a particular story about how 6 years ago, with her mom, she founded what became and what is the first Black, female-owned and run luxury safari lodging company. And that was back in Zimbabwe, I believe.
Yes.
And since that time, it has served as a role model, a blueprint, if you will, of sustaining tourism, redefining sustainable tourism, following the money, making sure the community benefits, and empowering women. But what was fascinating to me about that story, as with all stories, is how it started. And it started, if I did my homework correctly, on a family trip to Victoria Falls.
Yes, that's correct. We went to Victoria Falls actually for the marathon. So they have the Vic Falls Marathon July every year, and our foundation was doing a mass drug administration in Victoria Falls at the time. And my mother said, "Why don't you come along?" And we went. We were very last minute, we tend to be. And the only place we could stay at was a safari lodge. There were no hotels in the city that were available during the marathon weekend. And it is what is Zambezi Sands by Batoka Africa now, was Zambezi Sands owned by a group called Imvelo. And I think it was I'd been on safari as a child. I'm Zimbabwean, grew up in South Africa, spent a lot of time on the continent. But I think when you're younger, you don't appreciate it as much.
By the way, you're still young.
I am. The restorative power of nature doesn't quite hit the same way when you're a kid, and also just how humbling it was to be in the national park, to be around wildlife, was really incredible. But the one thing that I said struck me was when we were driving through one of the communities, the guide said to us, "Well, you don't really have to look. We're almost at the property." And it was just this difference, and we still see it a lot today in this industry, between how the local community was living and how they're existing and what the properties looked like. And then when you talk to lodge owners, lodge managers, and I think this is something that's changing in the industry, and I love that about it, but there was a strong focus on wildlife conservation. What are we doing for wildlife? Let's make sure that, nothing else goes extinct. But there was very little conversation around community and people. Every time you heard conversation around the community, it was how disruptive they are to wildlife and how there's conflict between the communities and wildlife. And then in terms of metrics of what were businesses doing for the local community, it was, well, we employ.
It was a huge economic gap.
Yeah. And then, this was just before COVID, and then obviously COVID hit, and what you saw was, because the communities were reliant on the lodges just in terms of employment, there was nothing sustainable. When the lodges shut, when hotels shut, people starved, and there was nothing for people to do. So I think the question for my mom and I when we started, well, me and then my funding partner, was what can we do so that the next time something else happens and these hospitality properties need to shut, the community can still thrive. And that's to do with skills and allowing for growth outside of just our business ecosystem and creating opportunity for that.
And that's what started Batoka.
And that's how we started Batoka.
And Batoka means?
So Batoka doesn't have a meaning, but one of our properties sits on what is known as the Batoka Gorge in Victoria Falls, which is a gorge about 16 kilometers upstream from the Victoria Falls that's dried up, and it's got an incredible view, and we kind of just kept that name.
But when you saw the disconnect, if you will, between the community and the lodges, between tourism and the locals, how do you bridge that at that point? Because in travel and tourism these days, we always like to say, let's follow the money, right? Where does the money go, right?
Yeah.
You have all sorts of countries now that are lobbying for tourism development saying, guess what? You get to take all your money out, right? That's not what you guys are doing.
Yeah, so I'll speak to two things. First, it's in terms of growth for people, creating opportunities. So we're really strong on training and upskilling our people to the point where, yes, it's disappointing when staff members leave, but I'm like, if you're leaving for a better position because we've given you a new skill set you didn't have before, that's better for your community, that's better for your family. Go ahead and grow. Then the other thing that we've brought in is something that we refer to as the TESO Fund. So we take 10% of all our bed night revenues, and the 10% is, I was born and raised Christian, the tithe is 10%, so 10% of the revenues that we're making, we put aside for a community fund. And the purpose of that fund is to partner with our staff who live in the local community on projects that help the community.
And they decide.
And they decide. So it's a conversation between us and them, and they decide what is it that their community needs, and how do we support them to do that.
Of course, one of the all-time challenges for anybody in Africa these days is how do you honor and preserve the culture and at the same time deal with changes in the system?
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about culture earlier today, and I think the point that I kept pushing across was it's about learning and building relationships. And we definitely got this wrong in the beginning. I think I spoke to people who were adjacent to the community, but not really in the community, and would say, oh, what are the issues that we should address, and what should we be fixing? And those were very different to what the community themselves wanted. Then when we look at, what can we learn from them to thrive in this space? They know the land. Something is, it's not simple, but like looking at agriculture, right? We really are looking forward to wanting to do more farm to table, but the people who know what makes sense to grow there are the people who grew up there. So the conversation has to be with the local community. It has to be with community leaders. It has to be with farmers who've been there for generations. There's science that we can come in and spend a lot of money and do that on, or we can just collaborate and bring them in as partners.
And if we go back 6 years, the safari business was male-dominated, still is.
Very much so.
Right? And you have to figure out a way to empower women so that the training that you do leads to something.
Yeah.
How are you doing that?
Yeah, and with it's easier said than done, because one of the other things is understanding how the locals see the role of women. And Zambezi Sands, for example, it's in the national park. It's about an hour, 15-minute drive from the town of Victoria Falls. So a lot of our staff stay on camp. Now, to explain to a family that we're going to hire this woman and she's going to live on camp and not be at home as a mother is quite difficult. So really looking at more what other roles can we really push training for women into, administrative roles, if that means introducing computer skills training, introducing, confidence building, speaking, those kinds of skill sets that allow them to still exist within their cultural context, but also grow. That's what we've been looking into. And then partnering with other organizations in Victoria Falls. There's a community-led organization also called Batoka, but Batoka Creatives. And it was started by a local woman around creating jewelry, working with them, where we can't find a way to bring more women in places. We work with Batoka Creatives, and we see how we fund some of their projects and work together.
Now, 6 years in, how much of what you're doing becomes a blueprint and a role model for you to teach other companies how to follow?
Do you know, Peter, I'm going to say it's difficult to call it a blueprint because I think every place is really different. We've been looking at other areas in Zimbabwe, and what we've done in Victoria Falls is simply not going to work. And I think what I've come to realize is it's the intent behind what we want to do, and the lessons that we learned around implementing that are important. So there isn't really a map, so to say, that we can follow to say, when we go into this next town, this is how we're going to do it, and it's going to work 100%.
Now, other than the 10% fund, what other ways are you involving the community so that they are invested in your
Yeah.
success?
So one of the other things that we do is our staff, in their contracts, they have to do community service in the community too. And this is an ongoing battle. But you know, there's always somebody that's worse off than you. And that's what we tell our staff. So we do trash pickup, volunteer in local orphanages in the community, help in the school in the community. And I think what I want to do is a mindset where it's not just the lodges are coming to help you in the community, it's we're empowering you to also help your community. So holding our staff to account on the minimum hours that they have to do a month is one of our other really strong community initiatives.
And how do you involve your guests? How do they involve themselves and immerse in what you're doing?
So our guests have the opportunity to participate in the same way. So, you know, this thing about how do you create experiences that dignify our culture and that educate. So one of the things that we look at is food. And we do a cooking lesson on our properties and have a local woman come and teach how we cook local food. We call it sadza, which is mealie meal, what it's eaten with. We also give our guests the opportunity to go and spend time with the organization we partner with, Batoka Creatives. We give them an opportunity to go and spend the day in the community to do a reading program at the schools. So, and everything is, we don't take donations from guests because we don't want to create a dependency and to create a system of come and give us your second hand because what's new is not valuable to the community.
Has that always been the policy?
Well, since we started, I don't know about other lodges.
I gotcha. I'm reminded of a story that happened in South America to me when I was taking about 25 writers, friends of mine, to Buenos Aires. And the hotel said, oh, we'll send limos for you. And I said, well, wait a second. The plane lands at 5 in the morning. You know the rooms won't be ready. So don't send limos. Ask the people who work at the hotel, the housekeepers, the doorkeepers, the guys who are doing the bussing of the tables. Ask them if they'll take their cars out to the airport and pick us up and take us to their community, and we're buying breakfast. Do you know what time we checked into the hotel? Midnight. Because they had a chance without any expectation to actually immerse in the culture, which is what you're doing.
And I think your experience of Buenos Aires was probably completely different to what anybody else has had. And it's that intention of the traveler as well, when they go and explore a new place, is to really want to learn what is there and what is available.
Well, first of all, congratulations on all the good work that you've been doing for the last 6 years. And of course, it's still an inspirational story of how you've redefined the word sustainable tourism as well. And towards that point, I'd like to invite Matt up to the stage. We have a little something for you. Would you like the mic?
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for a wonderful interview, Peter and Vimbai. Vimbai, I would love to award this to you, the FHS Africa Award for Leadership 2026, for all the wonderful work that you've continuing and pushing forward for the future. So thank you for being part of this community and such a great leader. Thank you.
Thank you.